The call came at 5:52 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had been awake for 20 minutes already, lying in the dark of my apartment, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the deposition I had to prepare for work. I was a paralegal at a mid-size firm in Austin, Texas. I had been there for 6 years. I was good at my job. I was careful, methodical, and I never missed a deadline. That morning, I was mentally running through a checklist of exhibits when my phone lit up on the nightstand. The number was my firm's managing partner. At 5:52 in the morning, I answered on the second ring. Claire. His voice was flat in a way I had never heard from him before. Not angry, not concerned. Flat the way a surface becomes flat after everything on it has been swept off. Don't come in today. Don't come in at all. HR will be in contact. The line went dead before I could say a single word. I sat up in bed. I held the phone in both hands and looked at the screen as though it might tell me something. The call log said the conversation had lasted 11 seconds. 11 seconds to end 6 years. I remember thinking that was not enough time. I remember thinking there had to be a mistake. There was no mistake, but it wasn't mine. I got dressed without knowing why. When your world cracks open at 6 in the morning, your body still goes through the motions. I made coffee I didn't drink. I sat at my kitchen table and waited for the HR email that arrived 47 minutes later. I read it 3 times before the words actually reached me. Termination for cause. Misappropriation of client funds. Alleged transfer of $214,000 from a settlement escrow account to an external account. An external account, the email stated, that had been opened in my name at a bank I had never set foot inside. $214,000. My name. My hands were shaking by the time I put the phone face down on the table. I pressed my palms flat against the wood and focused on breathing. I had processed enough legal documents in my career to understand exactly what termination for cause meant when the cause was financial fraud. It meant the firm was not just letting me go. It meant they had already been in contact with someone else. It meant the phone call I was waiting for next would not be from HR. It came 40 minutes later. 2 detectives from the Austin Financial Crimes Unit wanted me to come in voluntarily for a conversation. They were very polite about it. They used the word voluntarily twice. I had typed that word into enough legal briefs to know what it actually meant. I drove myself to the station. I remember the drive, the way you remember things when your brain is trying to protect you, in fragments without sound, like watching it through glass. I parked on the street. I walked through the front door. I sat in a room with gray walls and a table that was bolted to the floor, and 2 detectives put a folder in front of me and opened it, and there was my signature. My actual signature. On account opening documents for a bank in San Marcos I had never visited. On wire transfer authorizations for amounts that made my stomach turn, on a notarized letter of instruction that directed the escrow funds away from the client and into that account. My signature, on all of it. I told them I had never seen those documents. I told them I had never opened that account. I told them I had never authorized any transfer of any funds from any client account in 6 years of working at that firm. The older detective nodded while I talked. The younger one wrote things down. Neither of them looked particularly surprised by anything I said. That was when I understood they had been expecting me to say exactly that. They let me go home that afternoon with a very clear statement that I should not leave the state of Texas and should retain legal counsel as soon as possible. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the police station for 22 minutes before I could make myself start the engine. I called my mother on the drive home. She answered on the first ring. "I know," she said, before I had spoken more than 4 words. "Your brother called us this morning." My brother. Marcus. 31 years old, still living in the house he grew up in 20 minutes outside Austin, still driving the car my parents co-signed for, still borrowing money at irregular intervals that he always described as temporary. Marcus, who had always been my father's project. The one who needed more patience, more support, more chances. Marcus, who had watched me graduate college and pass my paralegal certification and build a career from nothing, and who had smiled at every family dinner and called me his successful little sister in a tone that I had always told myself was affectionate. Mom. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I didn't do this. Someone opened an account in my name. Someone forged my signature. I don't know how yet, but I need you to. Claire." She said my name the way she always said it when she had already made up her mind. "Your brother is very upset. This reflects on the whole family." I pulled into my parking garage. I sat in the dark with the engine running. "He called you," I said. "Before I did, before he even knew what I would say." She didn't answer that. "Mom, he called you before I called you." How did he know? How did he know this morning before HR even sent me the email? The silence stretched long enough that I could hear the traffic outside her house 2 states away. She and my father had retired to a suburb outside Nashville 3 years ago. A house my father always said was their reward for raising 2 good kids. I heard her exhale. "I'm sure there's an explanation," she said. "I'm sure Marcus just heard something." I ended the call. I sat in my car for a long time after that, the kind of long that has no clock. I was 31 years old, and I had just lost my job, and the police wanted to charge me with financial fraud, and my mother's first concern had been how my brother felt about it. I had known for a long time that something was wrong with how my family worked. I had spent a long time making excuses for it, adjusting myself around it, filing the sharp edges down so they didn't cut me every time I reached out. But sitting in that parking garage, something inside me went very quiet and very clear. He knew before I did. That meant he hadn't just heard something. That meant he had been waiting. The attorney I retained was a woman named Patricia Okafor, and she was the sharpest person I had ever sat across a table from. She had 20 years in white-collar criminal defense, and she did not waste a single word. She listened to everything I told her without interrupting, and then she asked me 3 questions. First, had I ever given anyone access to documents containing my signature? Second, had I ever shared personal identification information with a family member? Third, had Marcus ever needed money badly enough to do something like this? I thought about the car my parents co-signed. I thought about the loans described as temporary. I thought about the time 2 years ago when Marcus had called me in a panic about a debt he wouldn't name and asked to borrow $8,000. And I had said no, and he had not spoken to me at a family gathering for 4 months afterward. I answered all 3 of Patricia's questions honestly. She looked at me across the conference table and said, "Let's get his financial records." What came next took 3 weeks, and every day of those 3 weeks felt like standing in water that was slowly rising. I could not work. I could not call my parents, because every time I did, the conversation circled back to how hard this was on Marcus, how worried my father was, how I needed to think about what this kind of accusation does to a family. I stopped calling. I sat in my apartment and went through every document I had ever given Marcus access to, and I made a list, and the list was longer than I wanted it to be. 3 years ago, he had helped me move apartments. I had given him a copy of my lease, which contained my social security number. I had also, because I trusted him and because he had asked with a reasonable explanation, handed him a folder of paperwork to mail for me, utilities transfer documents, a few signed forms, because I was starting a new job that week and running behind. I had handed him a folder containing documents with my signature on them and asked him to drop it at the post office. He had never mentioned whether he actually mailed it. I called Patricia the moment I made that connection. She told me what I already suspected. If someone had retained copies of those documents, they had everything they needed. They had my signature, my social security number, my address history. Enough to open an account. Enough to forge an authorization. Enough to move $214,000 and make it look like me. She also told me what her investigator had found in Marcus's financial records, which the court had compelled after she demonstrated probable cause. 11 months ago, Marcus had opened a landscaping business that had no website, no registered clients, and no revenue. What it did have was a business checking account that had received a series of deposits over the past 4 months. Deposits that, when added together, totaled $214,000. Deposits that had arrived in 4 separate transfers, each one timed exactly 3 to 5 days after the escrow fund withdrawals from my former firm. I remember the exact moment Patricia told me that number. I was sitting on my couch, The afternoon light was coming through the window at a low angle, and it caught the dust in the air and made it visible. I watched the dust move, slow and directionless, while the number settled over me. $214,000, the same amount, the same timing, his account, my name on the source documents. He had built this carefully, deliberately, not in a moment of desperation, but over months of planning. He had kept the documents from my move. He had waited. He had learned enough about how escrow accounts work. And I thought about this later, the terrible patience of it. He had learned enough to know which accounts to target and how to time the transfers to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. He had not done this because he was sloppy or desperate. He had done this because he believed he was smarter than everyone looking. He had also, and this was what broke me open in a way I had not expected, called my parents the morning it was discovered. He had called them before I even knew. He had wanted to be the one to tell the story first. He had wanted to be standing next to them on solid ground, already part of the explanation by the time my voice came through their phone asking them to believe me. He had thought of everything, except the business account, except the deposits, except the investigator Patricia hired, who pulled the records and laid them out in a sequence so clean and so damning that even the detectives from the financial crimes unit stopped looking like they were humoring me. The morning Patricia called to tell me the DA's office had issued a warrant for Marcus's arrest, I was in the middle of making breakfast. I turned off the stove. I sat down on the kitchen floor, right there on the tile, and I put my head back against the cabinet, and I cried in a way I had not cried since I was a child. Not from relief. Not entirely. I cried because of what I now knew for certain about the person I had grown up with. I cried because of the 3 weeks I had spent watching my parents choose the story he gave them over the voice they had known for 31 years. I cried because I had handed him a folder of documents and asked him to help me and told myself that meant something. He was arrested on a Tuesday. He did not call me. My parents called me that evening, and my father's voice sounded like a room after a fire, still standing, nothing left inside. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know. He said he wanted to understand how this had happened. I listened to all of it. Then I said, very quietly, "You believed him before you believed me. I need you to sit with that." I hung up. I did not block their number. I just didn't answer for a while. The criminal case took 8 months. Marcus's attorney tried 3 separate arguments: mistaken identity, that he had received the money as repayment of a personal loan, that the account had been opened by a third party he could not name. Each one collapsed. The evidence was not complicated when laid out clearly. The timing of deposits, the matching amounts, the documents he had retained from 3 years ago, the IP address from which the account had been accessed, which traced back to the Wi-Fi network at my parents' house during a week Marcus had been staying there. 8 months, guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 6 weeks after that. 4 years, restitution of the full amount, and a felony fraud conviction that would follow him for the rest of his life. The civil case against my former firm took longer and settled out of court. They had terminated me without fully investigating. They had accepted what appeared on the surface without verifying the account creation details that would have immediately raised questions. Patricia was very good at her job. The settlement was enough that I did not have to think about money for a while. I returned to work 8 months after that first morning, not to the same firm, to a new one, smaller, with the senior attorney who had read about my case and reached out. She told me she thought I would make a good attorney. I enrolled in law school part-time that fall. My parents came to visit me the following spring. My mother brought food she had cooked and packed in a cooler for the drive from Nashville. My father sat in my living room and looked at his hands for a long time before he said anything. He told me he had replayed that first morning hundreds of times. He told me he understood now what it meant that Marcus had called them first. He said some things cannot be taken back, only carried. I told him I was not ready to forget it. But I was willing to try, slowly, to rebuild something. That felt honest. That felt like the most I had. I think about the folder of documents sometimes. The ordinary moment of it, me, running late, handing my brother a stack of papers and trusting him to drop them at the post office. The way trust operates before it has any reason not to. You don't take a picture of the moments that feel safe. You don't document the ordinary times you let someone in. And then one day, you're sitting in a gray room looking at your own signature on documents you never signed. And you have to trace the thread all the way back to find where you gave someone the thread in the first place. He took advantage of how much I trusted him. He took advantage of the access that trust created. He built something careful and cruel out of materials I handed him in good faith, and he waited years to use them. I work in law now. I understand better than I did how evidence works, how cases are built, how the difference between guilt and innocence can come down to a single account opened at a bank in a city you never visited. I understand how easy it is to believe the first story you hear, especially when it comes from someone standing right beside you. I also understand something I didn't have words for during those 8 months. The most dangerous person in your life is not a stranger. It's the one who knows where you keep your documents, the one who knows your signature, the one your parents answer for on the first ring before you've had a chance to speak at all. Be careful who you hand your folder to. Be careful who you call family.